Had a question or comment?
Hey, no question. Eric, I do remember studying this story with watching Richard's study in the book of Mark. So the parallel passage that you used, he talked about the same thing about when in the verse 29, when it says this kind can come forth by nothing but by prayer and fasting. I had written in my notes, underlined the word kind and wrote captivity next to that, and then after that verse wrote that prayer and fasting takes place after he is absent from them. So like you were saying, in the tribulation period, when he's no longer with them, they have to endure without him and to continue in that faith. And that they were struggling, like you said, with keeping their eyes focused on the spiritual side of things, and they were focusing on the flesh instead. So they weren't really in the will of God, so they weren't able to perform those miracles anymore because they weren't really, like, because right after that in verse 31 is when he says that the Son of Man is delivered into the hands of men, they shall kill him, and after that he is killed, shall rise the third day. But they understood not that saying and were afraid to ask him, because they were just so concentrated on the flesh and not following what he was trying to tell them. Is, like you said, he's the same today, yesterday, and forever, because he's always following his Father's will and obeying the will of the Father. And they weren't doing that. I remember Richard talking about that they weren't following what he was telling them was God's plan and God's will. They were wanting to follow, man's will, so to speak. So interesting. I'm glad you brought that up, because it kind of refreshed all of that for me. It's been a little while since I watched that study in Mark.
Yeah, very good. Thanks for bringing up those comments. Yeah, it reminded me of another verse where the Pharisees, I think, asked Jesus, said, no, it wasn't the Pharisees, it was the disciples of John the Baptist. The disciples of John the Baptist came to Jesus and said, we fast often, why don't your disciples fast? And he says, well, while the bridegroom is here, you don't fast, but the time will come when they will fast. And so, yeah, that's
I'm glad you said that, because that's exactly what I was thinking. I was like, where was that? I remember it being about the bridegroom and the groom, that you don't fast while the groom is present with the bridegroom. I was like, oh, okay, but I couldn't remember where that was.
Yeah, I don't remember exactly where that is either, but yeah, that is in, I think it's in Matthew, if I remember correctly.
Okay. Yeah, I couldn't find it. That's okay, but yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking about. So I think that was the example the cross reference he used, and I just didn't write it down.
But yeah, so he even says that you're not fasting now, but you will later, and then that's a reference to in the tribulation period, and it's a forced fast. Yeah, it's interesting when you look in the Old Testament and under Israel's program, the book of Leviticus says that God established 5 annual feasts. He didn't establish fasts; he established feasts. And but then when you read in I think it's in Zechariah, it talks about the fast of the 5th month, the fast of the 7th month, and I think the fast of the 11th month. And he says, why are you fasting? It's interesting how God says, you're my people, I've proclaimed feast for you. Oh, Ernie's given the passage. Matthew 9:15 is the passage. Yes, Jesus, can the children of the bride chamber mourn as long as the bridegroom is with them? But the days will come when the bridegroom shall be taken from them, and then shall they fast. Matthew 9:15.
Yeah. Okay.
Thanks, Ernie.
Thank you, Ernie.
But yeah, it's interesting that God proclaims in Israel all these feast days, but yet their religion comes along and they proclaim all these fasts. And that's what you see churchianity doing. They'll say, oh, this kind goeth not but by prayer and fasting, so I really need to show God I'm serious, that I'm going to fast, and I'm going to show that I'm going to have that faith. And it's like what Colossians 2 talks about. It's that it says in Colossians 2 verse 23, that the things, the commandments and doctrines of men, Colossians 2:23 says, these which things have indeed a show of wisdom and will worship, and humility and neglecting of the body, but not in any honor to the satisfying of the flesh. So I come up with this rule is I'm going to fast and I'm going to show God I'm serious so that I have the faith so that that God will heal me or heal my son or heal my mother or whoever it is. But really, God says in Colossians 2:19 that they're not holding the head. And then in verse 23, he says these commandments of men are just, they're worshiping their own will in neglecting their body. And so it doesn't bring any honor to God. All it does is satisfy the flesh. So it's interesting that Israel did that. They took God's feast days, stopped obeying the feast days, and set up their own fast days. And then Paul warns us in Colossians 2 that if we do that, neglecting the body, then what we're doing is worshiping our own will, and we're not holding the head. We're not following God, and what we're really doing is satisfying our flesh by neglecting the flesh. So.
Yeah, right. Awesome. Thank you.
Thanks, Angie.
Sure.
I'm going to read a couple of messages. Tom wrote, another early day tomorrow. I'll ask my question on Sunday. Another great study. I wish I could stick around. Good night. And then Connie said, thanks, Eric, for the study. I don't have a question. And then Clint, Linda sent me a text. Clint said he really enjoyed the class. He can't talk much now with coughing. Appreciates Eric's time and God's perfect word. And I was going to call on Karen and Ronnie if y'all had a question next or a comment.
I don't have any questions tonight. It was a great study. Thank you, Eric.
Thanks, Karen. And thanks, Ronnie. Glad you could join us.
Gail Brule, do you have a question or comment?
No questions. I just really appreciate every study that I have with you. I learn more all the time. Thank you, Eric.
Thanks, Gail.
Gail Salvage, what about you? Do you have a question or comment?
Yes, about the statement about Christ the same yesterday, today, and tomorrow. I think of it like he's God, and he will always be God. He won't change. That's all I got to say.
It is referring to Jesus as the man, but I mean you can apply it to God as well. It's a statement of character for Jesus Christ, both as God and as man. Like I say, Jesus Christ may do physical miracles back in Matthew through John. Maybe he's not doing those today. He may have a different gospel back then as today. But one thing that doesn't change about God is his character. God is love. God is joy. He's peace. He's all the fruit of the Spirit. He is, he never lies. He never, all those things about his character remain the same. So the context is really talking about faith, but everything about God's character is the same yesterday, today, and forever. He does not change in his character. So
he's faithful. Faithful. Like I said before, you can't please God without faith, and he always had faith in his Father.
Yes, the consistency of his character, of his faith. Yeah. Very good. Thanks, Gail.
That's good. Thank you. Love the study.
Thank you.
Richard, how about you? Do you have a question or comment?
We can't hear you. You're not.
It's in the bottom.
You're still muted.
Corner.
Okay. Oh, there it is. Okay.
Yeah, now we can hear you.
Yeah. Well, that was mind opening. That is something. I mean, I never looked at it that way. I'm going to have to look at this on YouTube a couple of times how to take this in. But fasting, I was raised in the church you were, and yeah, it was always, as a way to get closer to God, a way to get more religion, more spiritual. You fast. And I never seen any of that stuff in there that you were explaining. That was great. Yeah, but we were in a holiness church. We were not considered Pentecostals. We were holiness. Remember that?
Well, we were both Pentecostal holiness. Yeah, Pentecostal meant we spoke in tongues and moved in the Spirit, and holiness meant we was the legalistic part. We didn't drink, we didn't smoke, we didn't go to bowling alleys, we didn't do anything that had the remote connection to sin whatsoever, because we were holy. Yeah.
Yeah, and there was a big emphasis on fasting. Oh yes, fasting. I mean, that was the thing to do. If you could fast for a week, boy, you were really, in tune with God then, man. You were in good shape. And but it was going the opposite way. It was focusing on the physical. So I'm going to have to watch this on YouTube a couple times. So anyway, I got to go eat my ice cream for my birthday dessert.
That's right. Yesterday was your birthday. Yeah, happy birthday.
I'm going to go buy me a cake tomorrow, I think, but I'm going to eat some ice cream tonight.
Well, you're a little late. You're supposed to have the cake on your birthday.
I know. I went on a motorcycle ride, so my glucose is going to go up.
Well, you did what you wanted to do. That's good.
Okay, we'll see you later. Bye.
All right.
Happy birthday, Richard.
Birthday hug from Ernie.
Yes. Steve McDonald, do you have a question or comment?
No question, just a comment. Eric, that was a very good study. It revealed a lot of stuff that I had never saw there myself.
Yeah.
So thanks a lot.
You're welcome. I'm glad it was helpful.
Hey Frank, I was going to call on you next. You can unmute your microphone. It's the bottom left corner. You touch the little microphone. It should turn green. There you go. We can hear you, Frank, if you talk.
Okay. Yeah, okay. Yeah, there was a lot of information there, Eric. Like Richard said, I need to watch it again a couple of times to absorb it a little bit better. But it was always confusing about the faith of a mustard seed. And I used to tell people that say they can heal people. And I think if you went to a children's hospital or something, you ought to be able to heal them. If you literally take it as the faith of a mustard seed, but that was interesting, and I really need to watch that once or twice more to let it sink in better. Well, you touched on you won't be able to buy or sell the mark of the beast. And I guess I got kind of lost on that. Would you run an explanation on that a little bit more? Because these times we're living in right now, this coronavirus and the vaccine and that kind of stuff, does that in any way tie into the mark of the beast?
No, it doesn't tie in because you have all these other events that take place before them. Specifically, there is in Revelation 13, and this happens halfway through the tribulation period, that the false prophet in verse 14, Revelation 13:14, it says, "A false prophet deceiveth them that dwell on the earth by the means of those miracles which he had power to do in the sight of the beast, saying to them that dwell on the earth that they should make an image to the beast, which had the wound by a sword and did live. And he had power to give life unto the image of the beast, that the image of the beast should both speak and cause that as many as would not worship the image of the beast should be killed. And he causeth all, both small and great, rich and poor, free and bond, to receive a mark in their right hand or in their foreheads, and that no man might buy or sell, save he that had the mark or the name of the beast or the number of his name. Now, what happens halfway through the tribulation period, if you go to Revelation 17, is that in the first half, what starts the tribulation period is the Antichrist signs a 7-year covenant with the nation of Israel. That's from Daniel 9. He signs a 7-year covenant. So that's a 7-year tribulation period. And during the first 3.5 years, the Antichrist is a ruler over the region that Israel is in. There are 7 regional rulers, and he's one of the 7. And then halfway through the tribulation period, he gets complete control over the earth, the whole world. It says in verse 12, Revelation 17, verse 12, we talked about the 7 kings earlier in the lesson, so that's the first half. And then Revelation 17:12, it says, the 10 horns which thou sawest are 10 kings, which have received no kingdom as yet, but receive power as kings 1 hour with the beast. They have one mind, and shall give their power and strength unto the beast. This is just basically a broad overview of what happened. So halfway through the tribulation period, the Antichrist is given rule over the entire world, and there are these 10 kings that are over 10 different regions of the world, and they give their power to the beast. So basically they do whatever the beast says to do. And so then what we read in Revelation 13, what happens now that he's got rule over the entire world, is that the false prophet gets the world to make this image to the beast. That image of the beast is set up in the temple. Jesus calls that the abomination of desolation, spoken of by Daniel the prophet. And then that image of the beast is set up. They all have to bow down and worship it, and then or else they would be killed. And then he also sets up the mark of the beast. Since the Antichrist has control over the entire world with these 10 kings under him, that means he has control over the entire economy as well. So then he can control the entire world economy by saying, if you don't take my mark, then you can't participate. So basically, if you have, let's say, US dollars, and someone else has Japanese yen, all of that's going to be converted to this new currency, which is probably some digital currency that's related to this mark. And so if I don't take the mark, then my US dollars or your Japanese yen goes away. I can't convert it to this new currency, whatever this new currency is, this digital currency. So then whatever I had is worthless now. If I don't take the mark, then I can't buy or sell. So basically the yen or the US dollar or the Deutsche Mark or whatever, all these different currencies that are out there are all converted to this mark, this digital currency that is in the mark. And so if I don't take the mark, then I lose that. So now what's going on today is working toward that. I mean, before just a few years ago, probably 2 years ago, I heard the term Bitcoin, and I heard about what that is. That's a digital currency. Before 2 years ago, I never even heard what that is. I never even heard of a digital currency. So you have Bitcoin and these digital currencies coming about to set the stage for the mark of the beast. You have a new world order people talking about in the new age, and this new world order coming about. And I think that's what's going on with the COVID, is this is a worldwide epidemic that has been created so that now we can have a world order so we can have the solution be a new world order. I mean, that hasn't happened yet, but it's working toward that, I believe. So what we see today, I think, is setting the stage for all these things with the Antichrist. But if you take the COVID vaccine, you're not taking the mark. If you take a COVID test, you're not bowing down to an image. There is, it's just setting the stage for all that. So this all starts with the signing of a 7-year covenant that the Antichrist does with Israel. And then the mark of the beast and the image of the beast, that's halfway through the tribulation period when the Antichrist rules the entire world with 10 kings or maybe 10 presidents in our language under him, giving their power to him. So, we don't see the mark of the beast, we don't see the Antichrist, and all that doesn't start until after the rapture of the church. Once the rapture of the body of Christ takes place, then Israel's program resumes, and then there are some events that have to happen, and then you have the 7-year covenant. So we don't have to worry about actually taking the mark of the beast today because the rapture takes place before all these events happen. But at least I think we are seeing the stage being set so that when the rapture does take place, then we have the technology is there already, and the world leaders and everything with the COVID setting it up to have a one world ruler. So it's at least setting the stage for that right now.
Frank, your microphone is muted. If you look in your bottom left corner and click on that microphone again, there you go. We can hear you now.
That Abrahamic covenant that's making the news today with all these countries in the Middle East, is that leading to the peace treaty that you discussed just now with Israel?
Yeah, I believe so. I mean, the Antichrist does. You read Daniel 11 and you'll see the king of the north and the king of the south, and there's all this fighting. But when the Antichrist comes in, he establishes a 7-year covenant of peace with Israel. I think what's going on is leading toward that. I heard the other day that they said that they think one of the major accomplishments that Trump will have is that and I forget what they called it, but they called it some kind of Abrahamic type thing, bringing peace to the Middle East. Yeah, and so that's not the 7-year covenant. That's not the Antichrist. That's not the tribulation period. But yeah, it's leading up to that. Yeah, because that's one of the things the Antichrist will do is he'll bring peace in that area. And like I said, you've got a mosque there where the temple was. So you've got Islam as a big influence in Israel. You've got Judaism there, and then you've got the people who believe that's the Holy Land, that's Christianity. I mean, you've got several different religions in that area, and they're all warring against each other. So the Antichrist brings peace. So I think there's going to be some precursors to that. So yeah, I think what we see going on today is leading up to that 7-year peace treaty that the Antichrist will make. Yeah.
One last thing, when you hear people that say they got power to heal, lay hands on a person, they supposedly healed. But, this little things, I guess they would recognize that they healed. Like a person has a major heart problem or something, or even a physical bad injury, that, they wouldn't even, person getting out of a wheelchair, say, or something, you don't see that, but they'll pick little bitty things that they want to use it, that they heal to someone, but anyway, we know that's not taking place today. Thank you for all the information.
Yeah, I heard when Benny Hinn was real popular, he had these thousands of people coming to the Crusades, that they would screen out the people if they were in a wheelchair or some ailment that you couldn't fake a healing on. They would screen those people out. You never saw a wheelchair get up there, but someone who had back pain, well, we'll bring them up there. So yeah, you're right. It was always concentrating on little physical healings. Where if God's power was really coming through this faith healer, then why wouldn't the person with the wheelchair be healed and get up and walk? Yeah.
Yeah, I brought a friend of mine, I think it was about 1994, in New Orleans. Benny Hinn came down to a big stadium, And I was believing that kind of stuff back then, and I took him because he was in real bad condition, terminal illness, and well, we seen when he left that was all a bunch of malarkey. And the poor guy did die about 6 months later, but anyway. Yeah, okay, thank you, Eric.
Thanks, Frank. Appreciate those questions and comments.
We're glad you're with us tonight, Frank.
Thank you for letting me in.
Yes, indeed. Ernie and Liz, I was gonna call on y'all next to see if y'all had anything. A question or comment?
I'm okay, actually, tonight. I gotta agree with Rick, but he's not here. Yeah, wow, that's opened my eyes to a lot of stuff, especially the parable of the mustard, the tree. The way I was taught that was, that's the Christendom and church growing up, and the birds and false. Oh man. Anyway, so you've really, really opened it up, especially the grain of mustard seed. But I think Elizabeth has a follow-up question.
Hi. Hi,
Hi.
Eric.
Hi, Liz.
I was wondering if the portion in Mark 11:22 says, Jesus answered and saith unto them, have faith in God. For verily I say unto you that whosoever shall say unto this mountain, be thou removed, cast into the sea. Could I apply the teaching of the mountain that we learned tonight and faith to this portion too?
Yeah, I meant to, I just didn't have the time to get to that. But yeah, if you look in the first part there, verse 20, Mark 11, verse 20, in the morning as they passed by, they saw the fig tree dried up from the roots. And Peter calling, this is because before he had cursed the fig tree. It says, Peter calling to remembrance, saith unto him, Master, behold, the fig tree which thou cursest is withered away. And Jesus answering saith unto them, have faith in God. For verily I say unto you that whosoever shall say unto this mountain, be thou removed, and be thou cast into the sea. That's another reference to the religion of Israel, because it's significant that it's a fig tree here, because in Genesis chapter 3, the fig tree in your Bible represents religion. Religion is basically man's efforts to get to God. God, having faith in what God says is how you have life, but the fig tree is a representative of man's way of not listening to God and getting to God. You see that in Genesis 3 when Adam sins. In verse 6, Genesis 3:6, when the woman saw that the tree was good for food, and that it was pleasant to the eyes, and a tree to be desired to make one wise, she took of the fruit thereof and did eat, and gave also unto her husband with her, and he did eat. And the eyes of them both were opened, and they knew that they were naked. So now they see their problem. They see that they have sinned. They lost their clothing of light. They're naked. They see their sin. But instead of going to God for the answer, they come up with their own answer. It says they sewed fig leaves together and made themselves aprons. So instead of going to God, they come up with their own answer. And the answer is fig leaves. So the fig tree is a representation in your Bible of religion. It's what is used to replace what God says. And so that's why in Mark 11, verse 20 and 21, it's the fig tree that Jesus cursed. And so then that's why verse 22, Jesus answering saith unto them, have faith in God, for verily I say unto you that whosoever shall say unto this mountain, be thou removed and be thou cast into the sea, and shall not doubt in his heart, but shall believe that those things which he saith shall come to pass, he shall have whatsoever he saith. So he says, have faith in God. Have faith in God is the way you remove the fig tree or the mountain of religion that's in their way. and you end up casting it into the sea. The sea is the devil's domain. Revelation 17, the great whore, she sits upon many waters. Revelation 13, when the beast is resurrected by Satan for the last half of the tribulation period, he comes out of the sea. Genesis 1 verse 2, when you have the Lord, when he creates the world, he moves upon the face of the waters. That's when he creates light. So there are several references in your Bible which would indicate that the sea or the waters is a type of Satan's realm. And so that's why it says, basically, you're removing this mountain of religion and casting it into the sea. You're getting it into Satan's realm, and all that is going to be cast into the lake of fire. You know, Revelation 20, at the great white throne judgment, it says in verse 13, for that great white throne judgment, Revelation 20:13, it says, and the sea gave up the dead which were in it. The sea, so that's Satan's realm. All the unbelievers are seen as being in Satan's sea, and so it gives up the dead, and then they're judged there. So that's just several references to show that the sea represents Satan's realm, and that's why the mountain is cast into the sea. Is we get rid of that mountain of religion, we throw it where it belongs, in the sea where all the dead and unbelievers are, and then all that will be cast into death. Death and hell will be cast into the lake of fire in the end. Very good question. Thanks, Liz.
Thanks.
Jerry, do you have a question or comment? And Jerry, before you start, Connie just also said, wow, I always thought that the fig tree represented Israel. So I just wanted to say that comment before you started, Jerry.
Okay.
Oh yeah, regarding Israel, the vine represents Israel. Isaiah chapter 5, maybe? Yeah, Isaiah chapter 5, verse 7. Isaiah 5 verse 7 says, the vineyard of the Lord of hosts is the house of Israel, and the men of Judah his pleasant plant. And you'll see there are several parables that Jesus gives in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, talking about the vineyard. The parable of the vineyard, or it's likened to a laborer going into the vineyard. And that's because Israel is likened unto the vine, but the fig represents religion. So, anyway, that's just an added thing there. Ernie says also Psalm 80, verse 8. Psalm 80, verse 8. Yeah, there you go. Yeah, thou hast brought a vine out of Egypt. Thou hast cast out the heathen and planted it. So Israel brought out of Egypt, vine brought out of Egypt, Israel's the vine. Yeah, very good. Yeah, thanks for that reference.
Connie said thanks. All right, Jerry, your turn.
Okay, and so the fig leaf that Adam and Eve put together, representing the works of man to cover their sin, would the fig leaf also represent religion, meaning apostate Israel? As in the body of Christ, you have Israel representing, and the vine represents Israel. And then in Israel, you got believing and unbelieving. The vine and the unbelieving Israel, apostate, would be represent the fig leaf, along with Christianity today.
Yeah, that's true. Since the fig is representing religion, and apostate Israel is religion, or churchianity is religion, then yeah, apostate Israel would also be represented by the fig. So yeah, I mean, that's a good point. Connie mentioned that she thought that the fig was Israel, and In a way it is. If it's, you're talking about apostate Israel. Yeah, believing Israel is the vine, but apostate Israel is the fig. Yeah.
And that's amazing to see those distinctions as we come along and learn these things together like we're learning. It's really just exciting, after all these years and on that journey and how these pieces are coming together. One thing also for your encouragement, Eric, was we started with 22 people at 7 o'clock and no one left. Till 8:04 somebody had to go. So that's a real,
Wow.
that was a lot, and that was busy, and the people just, and it was just gratifying and to me, and I wanted to let you know that I know you can watch the numbers, but I keep the numbers down just for reference to me. But all 22 people stayed until you was finished. So that was pretty good.
Yeah, that is good. Yeah, I don't really watch that so much because I'm focusing on what I'm talking about. So that's good to know.
You usually see people kind of maybe scatter on that sometimes, but they really helped me. I was encouraged by that. And I got off on a rabbit trail, but I guess it's gone now, but enjoyed it. And again, I know I say this pretty often, but this is kind of how it works. As we own this long journey, been doing this a long time, and some pieces were put together for all of us again tonight, Eric, and we appreciate it. Have been just as when you're reading through Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, Hebrews, and Revelation, and seeing it's not to us, but it's for us, and that for us is very important to understand that prophecy, that we don't take that misused mustard seed thing and just bring it over into our life today and just create chaos, confusion, and disappointment. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Jerry. Thanks for the comments.
Eric, I had a thought when you were reading about the New Jerusalem coming down out of heaven in Revelation. I have a dear friend that believes that the Israel that we know now is really Israel. And so it made me think that New Jerusalem coming down out of heaven, that is what's going to be set up in Israel and become the throne of God for the millennial reign. Am I thinking right? That the Israel that's there now has nothing to do with what's going to happen in the future. Is that correct?
Yes. Yeah, like if you go over to Daniel chapter 9 and it talks about the end times there, because that's a common misconception. In churchianity, there is a lot of focus on thinking of Israel being as God's people, that we should give money to Israel, support them, bring them up. And I guess the idea is that we would bring in Israel, make them a nation again. But that is contrary to Scripture. When you look in Daniel 9 and the 70 weeks there in verses 24 through 27, in verse 26 you're told, Daniel 9:26 says, "And after 62 weeks shall Messiah be cut off, but not for himself." So that's a reference to Jesus' crucifixion. And then it says, "And the people of the prince that shall come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary, and the end thereof shall be with the flood, and unto the end of the war desolations are determined." So there is a destruction there of that city and the sanctuary, which I believe, that the people of the prince there is a reference to Israel there. And I think that right now you look at what's in Israel, you've got that mosque over there. Well, that's not God's temple. So destroying the city and the sanctuary, you could see why that would have to happen to get rid of the Islamic part over there. And then it says once that's done, so verse 26 says that he will come and destroy the city and the sanctuary. And then at verse 27 it says, "He shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week." And that's the 7-year tribulation period. "And in the midst of the week, he shall cause the sacrifice and the oblation to cease." So, and then 2 Thessalonians 2 tells you that the Antichrist sits in the temple, declares himself to be God. So really, what ends up happening is just before the tribulation starts, is that city and the sanctuary in Israel is Jerusalem. The city of Jerusalem and the sanctuary are destroyed by the Antichrist, and then he builds a temple there and then has everybody worship him. And I mention that because it's sort of like what churchianity is trying to do today. The idea here is that, oh, what's going on in Israel with Islam and that mosque is not according to God, so we've got to go over there and destroy it, and then we set up God's temple. That's what the Antichrist is going to do. But yet, so that's what he does there. So he destroyed, Jerusalem is destroyed, the sanctuary that's there is destroyed. Then he sets up a new temple. He says, okay, now we've got God's temple. Then he sits in the temple, according to 2 Thessalonians 2, and declares himself to be God. But then what happens, if you look over in Revelation 17, in Revelation chapter 17, when Jesus Christ comes back, maybe it's not 17 I'm looking for. Maybe it's 16. Yeah, 16. Revelation 16. So when Jesus Christ comes back, it says in verse 19, Revelation 16 verse 19, and the great city was divided into 3 parts, and the cities of the nations fell, and great Babylon came in remembrance before God to give unto her the cup of the wine of the fierceness of his wrath. So when Jesus Christ comes back, he's going to destroy everything the Antichrist did. And that's where verse 20, we read that every island fled away, the mountains were not found. And then you go over to Revelation 18, verse 2. He cried mightily with a strong voice, saying, Babylon the great is fallen, and has become the habitation of devils, and the hold of every foul spirit, and a cage of every unclean and hateful bird. You go down to, verse 8, Revelation 18:8. Therefore shall her plagues come in one day, death and mourning and famine, and she shall be utterly burnt with fire, for strong is the Lord God who judgeth her, and the kings of the earth who have committed fornication and lived deliciously with her shall bewail her and lament for her when they shall see the smoke of her burning, standing afar off for the fear of her torment, saying, Alas, alas, that great city Babylon, that mighty city, for in 1 hour is thy judgment come. So you can see what happens in Daniel 9 is that when the Antichrist first gets people to destroy Jerusalem and the sanctuary, then he builds his own sanctuary, sits in the temple, declares himself to be God, and then when Jesus comes, he destroys everything the Antichrist is. In 1 hour, Babylon is destroyed. There's an earthquake that divides the city into 3 parts, and it's burnt with fire. Jesus Christ completely destroys that city over there, and then, like I said, now, and then Jesus Christ then sets up his kingdom on earth. So yeah, if you've got those verses there show you, it goes against, because churchianity teaches, well, Israel is God's people, and God established the nation again in 1948 or 1949 or whatever, when it was established as a nation, and so now we need to give money to Israel to bring in the kingdom there. But really, when you look through the scriptures, it's the opposite. It's the Antichrist who gets that city destroyed, builds up the city, and then it's completely destroyed by Jesus at his second coming. So it doesn't matter what kind of money or what kind of support you give to Israel to try to build up that nation, because it's going to be apostate under the Antichrist. Jesus Christ will completely destroy it. And like you say, Revelation 21, verse 10, you've got Holy Jerusalem coming out of heaven from God. So God doesn't need us to give money to Israel to build up Israel. God is going to destroy what the Antichrist has there, and he's going to bring his Israel from heaven down to the earth.
Thank you, Eric. That was great. Thank you. Does anyone else have any questions they want to ask or any more comments? I guess this is it then, Eric. We appreciate
All right.
your teaching so much.
Well, we have next Tuesday. I still have a few verses to go over from Mark that I put in that email, so we'll go over those next time. And then on Sunday, we've 1 Corinthians 4. We might finish the chapter this time. So hope you can join us then.